Hello and welcome to Forbidden Talk, a show dedicated to unearthing social taboos facing the Middle Eastern community. I'm Jenny Hammond and today we're looking at when people lose their faith and become atheist. Here in the UK, few would think twice if you said you were atheist. It's a matter of private choice, but in some parts of the world, especially the Middle East, such a declaration is not only against religion, but in extreme cases can be tantamount to a death sentence. No country makes atheism a specific crime, but neither gives atheists legal protection or recognition. In some majority Muslim countries, such as Turkey and Lebanon, atheists can live safely as long as they live quietly. In other countries, Egypt for example, citizens are required to register as participants of an officially recognised religion, usually Christianity, Judaism or Islam. Without this registration, citizens are not allowed to receive medical services, drive, attend university or travel abroad, forcing non-believers to lie. So what happens if a person loses their faith and becomes an atheist? Earlier I spoke with an ex-Coptic Christian from Egypt. Well, Mr. Corrales, welcome to the studio.
Hi.
So I'd like to start by asking you, what does atheism mean to you?
Well, atheism for me is just not believing in any of the current religions. As Christopher Hitchens say, what can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence as well.
Well, you're from Egypt, so religion is a big part of the culture there.
Yes, exactly.
So how did you grow up with religion and how did you decide to turn your back on the religion you were brought up in?
Well, it's not easy. I was born to a Christian family, and back in Egypt, especially in the last 20 or 30 years, the general attitude became much more religious. It reached religious fanatism at some point, after a brief, let me call it secular era, starting from the 30s, 40s. And then even after the army coup in the 50s and the 60s, there was the nationalism and there was the socialism. But then for some political events, the defeat against Israel in the war, and then moving from socialism to capitalism, and then the rise of the right wing, supported mainly by the Gulf countries and America. What happened is that more and more people turned more to religion, and religion occupied the space that nationalism occupied in the previous decades. So I was born in the 80s, and I was raised in a very religious society. On a personal level, I was born to a Christian family, as I said before. We were too religious. I was actually living most of my life in the church, even my spare time. Segregation had started also in the 80s, so it was not official, but most of the Christian young people used to have all their activities in the church, football, theater, everything. Some things doesn't make sense in religion, and everybody knows about it, but we decide intentionally to suppress the sound or just keep it aside. I need to say this also, the internet. Well, it is not just me, even some of the people I know. The start of the forums on the internet and the blogs, because before that all the books, all the controversial books were banned. Any movie that has any reference to a subject that touches religion by any means were cut. The introduction of internet in our life was really a very important event for us. The blogs and the forums start to open your mind. You start to find that the legends or the stories in the Bible or in the Quran are the same in many other religions. What happened is that you find one day that after many years of doubt or you start to find that it doesn't make sense, and then the next decision that okay, it is totally untrue and it doesn't make sense, but should we keep it or should we not? What would the people do when they realize that one day there is no God and there is no heaven or hell? What would happen to the population? And you start to think, is religion good? Does it have any benefit for the society? So yeah, at that point there are many opinions. Some people think that, well, it is necessary if the people are not educated enough to just control them and keep them where they are. Sometimes I bounce between the two opinions. Should we promote atheism, or if the people are not educated enough, then let them be where they are.
Religion is a big thing in Egypt, and
Exactly.
How did your friends and family react? Do they know that you've decided not to believe anymore?
Most of them don't know. Some of them have some feeling from the posts I post on Facebook, from some of the discussions. I never said it clearly, like I'm an atheist, but it is obvious in the middle of discussions and for some social networking subjects. But most of them don't take it seriously. They think, oh, well, maybe the devil just crawled into his mind, and because he is living in the West, and the Western culture started to have an impact on him. So,
well, how's atheism viewed in Egypt? Can you be openly atheist?
no, definitely not, because according to the Egyptian law, first of all, the culture, the culture back in Egypt doesn't allow such thing, because it is hard enough to be a non-Muslim. It is very difficult to be a non-Muslim, and then non-Christian. It is even impossible, and this is even regulated by the law. And I expect in the next few years to be even more difficult in terms of law. You might know about the Egyptian revolution. Mm-hmm. Now I like to call it uprising more. What happened? One day I was thinking, if religion was not a factor there, if it wasn't an element, what would have happened? I think Egypt had a much better opportunity. We could have had a better future if the people were not easily manipulated by religion.
If you went back to Egypt, would you be worried about maybe your safety, as you have been a little bit outspoken about being an atheist?
I think so, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today.
Thanks a lot.
But why is atheism so taboo in the Middle East? I went to London Metropolitan University to speak to Geoffrey Haynes, Director of the Centre for the Study of Religion, Conflict and Cooperation, to find out.
The presumption is that if you don't have a God, you don't have a belief in God, you don't have a demonstrable set of moral and ethical guidelines on how to live. So I think a belief in God is synonymous with a view of the world, it's believed, which is appropriate for a sort of a code of living. Not to have that implies that your ability to live by a code is absent, and I suspect that's the main reason.
So how is religion viewed in the Middle East? Unlike
many Western contexts, even in the United States, say, where being religious is much more common than, say, being religious in the UK or France, I think that it's taken to be a hallmark of civilized life, and not to be religious, not to follow a religious faith, is an indication of a lack of civilization. So it's much better to be a Christian or a Jew than to be an atheist.
What's the dominant religions in the Middle East and where are they most strong?
With the exception of Israel, of course, and Lebanon, these are exclusively Muslim majority countries. And within those countries, the dominant faith is Sunni Islam. Shia Islam is a minority faith throughout the region, except for in Iran, except for in Iraq, and it's a large minority, or maybe even a majority in Bahrain.
Why is leaving Islam sensitive compared to other religions?
I think that to leave Islam implies you're leaving your community and its values. So it's an important step in asserting autonomy or independence, and this is seen as an unwelcome development in a community-oriented society.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Welcome back to Forbidden Talk today, when people lose their faith and become atheists. As we just heard from Jeffrey Haynes, leaving the faith is a particularly sensitive issue when it comes to Islam, which was initially founded in part as a sort of community. Abandoning Islam is traditionally considered not just apostasy, as it is in other religions, but a specific transgression called Rida. In the first days of Islam, the religion was also a physical community under siege from outside forces and facing the possibility of fracturing within. To leave the faith was also to abandon the larger community, a crime considered akin to treason in the way we understand it in the West. Obviously, times have changed over the centuries, and a lone Muslim leaving their faith is no longer a threat. But the religious pronouncements commanding punishment for Rida are still evident in the Quran, which may explain, in part, why this view still persists. Salim Chagtai from the Islamic Research and Education Academy gave Forbidden Talk his view.
If you want to leave Islam, then that is considered pretty much one of the worst things you can do. So it's definitely not allowed. It is seen as a kind of act of treason. And it's very, I mean, in terms of the penalty in the hereafter is very, very severe. If a person makes that open and shouts it from the rooftops, and that's dealt with pretty much in the way of treason, and you know, but that's done through a legal and a court process. It's not just, you know, and unfortunately in some communities we hear in the Middle East and even in the Muslim world, we hear of communities where it's basically a kangaroo court or it's jungle justice and people go and take things into their own hands. No, this is not the way it is at all. In Islam we have a very, very fixed and strict legal system by which, again, you know, I mentioned this before, is that all possible excuse and barriers are removed before something very severe takes place, especially when it's a severe penalty. So again, the person is given the chance to repent, to think about what they're doing, and really, given that it's a capital offence, then only a real sort of person who wants to be a martyr or a lunatic, in which case they wouldn't be executed if they've got any mental problems, would actually go and advocate that, yes, I have left the religion and I'm open about it.
How are ex-Muslims viewed?
Usually, with obviously they're not given, they're not welcomed with open arms. Actually, now what's happening is that, because I mean, my organisation, the Islamic Education Research Academy, we deal with a lot of cases like this, and we show them a lot of understanding, and usually what we found in possibly 99% of the cases that it's actually a rebellion against something else. So it's actually a rebellion against something else. So it's not that they've lost their faith, rather they've lost faith in their community, rather than lost their faith per se.
Islam is probably the most extreme religion to leave because of its governing law, Sharia. Although covering only Muslims unless incorporated into national law, it assumes people are born into their parents' religion. Thus, ex-Muslim atheists are guilty of apostasy, crimes against God. Potential sanctions can be severe. 8 states, including Iran, Saudi Arabia and Sudan, have the death penalty for such offences, although in reality such punishments are rare. Instead, many atheists are prosecuted for blasphemy or inciting hatred. The rise to power of Islamic parties after the Arab revolutions is likely to make life more difficult still for those who leave Islam. New rulers in Tunisia and Egypt have jailed several people who have been outspoken about their lack of belief. Activists, albeit often exiled, have become more outspoken about their right not to believe in a God. Organisations abroad for former Muslims are increasingly active too. The Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, set up by a group of non-believers, provides support for those who have renounced Islam. Joining me in the studio now is Mariam Namazi, Director for the Council of Ex-Muslims in the UK. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, maybe we can start with you telling me why you set up the Council for Ex-Muslims.
The reason the Council of Ex-Muslims was set up in June of 2007 was because apostasy, leaving Islam, is punishable by death in at least 10 countries, and it's a prosecutable offence in many more. So even in countries that are deemed to be, moderate countries, like Morocco or Tunisia, you do have cases of people being prosecuted and punished for leaving Islam. And so we decided that it would be important to have an organisation that publicly renounces Islam and leaves Islam as a way of, one, showing people who want to leave that it's a possibility, and two, breaking this taboo that comes with leaving it. It's sort of like gay people who came out of the closet. Your sexuality is your own business, but if you're feeling under threat as a result of it, then this sort of public coming out is a form of resistance. And so that's really the idea behind the Council of Ex-Muslims. Whether you're religious, whether you're an atheist, is nobody's business but your own. But when you are threatened for it, when you are possibly even killed for it, then it is important for people to come out publicly as a way of challenging the sort of apostasy laws, which again are very clearly linked with the rise of Islamism and this far-right regressive movement.
Well, why is apostasy so taboo in the Middle East?
I think apostasy is taboo in all religions, and fundamentally I think you find apostasy laws in all of the major religions as a way of control, as a way of suppressing any sort of dissent and questioning. Yusuf Qaradawi, who's an Egyptian scholar, Islamic scholar, he said that if people were allowed to leave Islam, there would be nothing left of the religion, basically. And so it is a sort of way of keeping control and not allowing people to leave. But again, I think it goes back to the fact that whilst it does exist in all religions, because Islam is linked to a political movement nowadays, it has state power. We have theocracies in the 21st century. As a result, it means a lot more than a verse in a religious book. It's practically, in many places, the law of the land, and therefore makes it very, very dangerous and difficult for many who want to leave or who want to be atheists, who don't want to believe in Islam anymore.
So why is it important that people do renounce Islam if they stop believing, especially in certain countries which it's so dangerous to do this? Why don't they just carry on living a lie, if you like?
I mean, I suppose the answer is why not? I mean, why shouldn't people be able to think as they please and live as they please, as long as they're not harming anybody? And I think that if it's a fundamental right to believe in religion, it is also a fundamental right to be free from religion and to not believe in religion and to be an atheist and to be able to shout it from every rooftop. Why should it be a punishable offence? I mean, some will say that, well, you've got to abide by the rules of the land. It's fine to be an atheist in Britain, but you can't be one in Morocco, you can't be one in Iran. Well, why not? Why not? If people had to abide by every rule, however unjust, we would still be living in a era where slavery was permissible, where women didn't have the right to vote, where children would still be working. I mean, laws. There are many laws that are good and that have been fought for by people, and many of them that are bad, that are oppressive. And the denial of freedom of expression, the denial of the right to believe in what you want is a human rights violation, and we have to allow people to speak up and to think as they please. And from our perspective, we will keep fighting until it is no longer taboo to say you're ex-Muslim, until you are no longer killed for being an ex-Muslim, and until you can safely and securely say you are an atheist without fearing your family, without fearing Islamists, without fearing the law. And I think it is an important fight that people who are Muslims should also be defending, because in many countries, many Muslims who don't follow or toe the line of the Islamists face accusations of apostasy or blasphemy because of, they might call for reform or interpret things differently than the ruling elite in that country. And in that sense, apostasy and blasphemy is something that is thrown at, the accusation of it is thrown at many people, including many Muslims. You have, for example, in Hamza Kashgari in Saudi Arabia, he just did a tweet about, Muhammad, and he also tweeted about the situation of women in Saudi Arabia, saying, well, they didn't need to go to hell because they already live in hell. And he's possibly facing the death penalty for blasphemy or apostasy. Many of these people on death row are Muslims as well, and I think we need to question laws that try to stifle free expression. There is nothing wrong with people expressing themselves. You may not like it. I don't like a lot of religious views that I hear, but that's life. You can argue and and speak up against these views, but to think that people you disagree with should be killed just because they don't believe what you believe is outrageous. And it's doubly outrageous that in the 21st century we have countries that impose these laws and people who actually dare to defend them.
Well, I spoke to an Islamic scholar and he said that in his experience 99% of the people who leave Islam are actually they're angry with their culture or their country. They're not actually angry with Islam. Do you think that that's true, or do you think it carries no weight?
Well, I mean, I think if if someone was concerned about this issue, they would not be so busy justifying it or ignoring its implications. I think Sharia law is Islamic law. It's based on the Quran, the Hadith, and Islamic jurisprudence. All the schools of Islam demand that apostates be punished by death. The discussions is over how apostates should be killed. Should they be beheaded? Should they be thrown into fire? And so on and so forth. That's where the debate is on apostasy, not on whether apostates should be killed or not. So in a sense, there is a clear link with Islamic rules. But the reality is that all major religions want their apostates dead. How come no one else but Islam is doing it? And again, it goes back to the Islamic movement rather than Islam as a personal belief. It goes back to the political Islamic movement that imposes Sharia law, that imposes apostasy laws. And if we're going to get rid of apostasy laws, it's no use making excuses for it and blaming it on this and that. Rather, it's looking at the states and the political movements that impose it and demanding that they stop.
Islam is quite a consuming religion if you are Muslim. So when you left the religion, how did that affect your life?
I think not every, Islam as a personal belief is lived in many different ways. You have so many Muslims who are women rights campaigners, who are secularists, who are fighting for the separation of religion from the state, who are fighting against Sharia laws in the Middle East and North Africa, but also here in the West. It's not lived in the same way by everybody else. I myself come from a Muslim family. My father, for example, has never drunk alcohol. He's never eaten pork. His father was an Islamic scholar, and so he prayed 5 times a day. He's quite religious and observant, but he never forced religion on me. So I was never forced to wear the hijab. I only, knew about it when the Islamic regime came into power and forced it on girls and women. I was never told that I was lesser than a boy. that I couldn't mix with boys, that I couldn't swim, that I couldn't dance, you know, that I was a source of fitna and chaos in society until I was faced with an Islamic movement. And so for me, leaving Islam, I felt just as free as when I lived under it, in the sense that it was never imposed on me. And that's why I think this distinction between Islam as a personal religion and Islam as a political movement is key for people to both be able to not scapegoat Muslims and attack Muslims for their beliefs, but to see this as being more about politics than religion.
But I suppose for a lot of people, another concern about being openly atheist is how it will affect their family.
Definitely.
And how has it affected your family? Are there risks for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, my experience is just mine. There are many people who have faced death threats from their families, who have had to be removed from their homes and moved to, in Britain as well, where we've helped people go to shelters in different cities because they were afraid, seriously in danger of being killed by their closest loved ones, you know. So in that sense, the risk is real for people from their families, from Islamists. You know, I'm threatened all the time by Islamists, not by my family members. And obviously my family couldn't really go back to Iran either. And for family members that I do have still living in Iran, it can be quite uncomfortable sometimes. But the point of the matter is that for everything that we take for granted today, there are people before us that fought for them. And in that sense, today we have to fight for certain things as well. You know, not everybody can, and that's fine. And people fight for things in different ways. Some do it privately, some do it in, you know, via art, via music. I do it as a political campaigner, you know. And so the risks are real, but the fight is real and important as well.
What do you think of the word infidel? Because although it just means non-believer, it's become a very politicised and dangerous word now.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite easy to label anyone with infidel, kafir, you know, being a source of fitna, as a way of a blasphemer, an apostate, as a way of isolating them, as a way of silencing them. You know, it becomes very difficult for people to speak up if they are labelled with these labels because of the connotations. And one of the things we're trying to do is to turn these words over their heads. I think I'm proud to be an apostate. Apostasy is my right. I'm proud to be a blasphemer. Blasphemy is my right. Or, you know, the Islamists who say women are a source of fitna. I am a source of fitna for Islamism because it is people who transgress norms, people who dissent, people who refuse to submit are those who are labelled as such. And I think, especially when challenging such a brutal movement, it is crucial for people to be apostates and blasphemers.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, now it's your turn to join the discussion, so please get in touch by emailing us at forbiddentalk@levant.tv or find us on Facebook. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.